Who's ready to judge some books by their covers? Because I know I certainly am. I am a writer and an avid reader, a former graphic designer full time, but I still work in marketing as a director of marketing. So I feel a pretty good idea about how to do design. I went into Barnes and Noble for this because I really like to just get their displays and pan a camera around because that way I don't just get books that I would be gravitating toward anyway, whether they're good or bad. And it feels like a little bit fairer. So let's get to the books. Okay, let's start things off with a much lauded book. This is James by Percival Everett. This is a retelling of Huck Finn from Jim's perspective. It sounds fantastic. Incredibly excited to read this at some point. I will say, I think that this cover is really interesting because it does a lot of cool things. Like, I do really love the way that the J and James is extended and a novel is worked into there. The use of the illustration of Jim, but his head is sort of indistinct. It's sort of disappeared into the letter itself. The letter form is really interesting. My biggest issue with this one is really the color choices. I mean, I just don't find them personally appealing, but I get the idea behind them. It does give this book a sort of old-fashioned feel, and I think that was probably the intention, to make it kind of feel timeless and not necessarily of the moment. So that works for me. So really, it's mostly the color choices that I'm just not feeling with this one. Here is Four Squares by Bobby Finger. I don't know much about this one. I will say there are some very interesting things being done here with color. I do like the contrast, the blues and the greens and the yellows and the oranges. The interesting thing to me about this, and again, maybe if I understood the book more, I'd get the idea behind it. But it's called Four Squares. We see four different windows, but the other windows are so empty. And that might be the point. It certainly is intriguing. And I think from a purely design perspective, I think this is really strong. It's certainly striking with the color choices, especially. The typography here with the extreme sort of amount of space between lines, between four and squares, and then the author's name is becoming more and more common. You're seeing that a lot more often, but I think it's successful here. Next up, we're going to take a look at The Limits. This one was interesting because it was really just kind of hard for my brain to take in what was going on with it from a graphic standpoint. It's nice and clean. There's really nothing wrong with it. I just find it sort of indecipherable, and then therefore it doesn't really give me anything more than vibes, which I don't dislike. I think the issue here really comes from the printing. I feel like a lot of it got very muddy. I don't think this is something that looked like this on the screen, and that is one of the dangers of graphic design. Sometimes something can look fantastic on the screen, but I just think in print, I don't know. This one's not doing it for me, mostly because of the muddiness of everything. This next one is Assassins Anonymous. We don't really get much of this kind of visual metaphor anymore. This used to be more popular, but I think there is a lot to like here. I really like the typography. I like the color choices here. This really bold red background and contrasting with the blue on the cup. The issue I have with this one is I really wish they hadn't done a digital picture. I think if they'd actually figured out a way to get the cup, even if they had to print it, and then actually putting a real dagger or small knife through it, I just think it would have been more successful. I get what they're going for here. I get the idea of the look. Just kind of loses something for me because of that, but it's a pretty minor complaint. Overall, I think this is pretty successful. This one caught my eye, not necessarily because it's brilliant, but I thought it was very strong. It has some good typography, some good color choices. The background wing is definitely interesting, but there's one thing that really just takes what is a clean design and messes it up. And that is, yes, this very ugly sticker. I get the idea behind stickers. I understand the marketing thinking. I still don't like it, especially on a relatively clean design like this. And that is the end of part one. As always, I just have way too many books I want to talk about, and it takes too long per book to get through that many. So there will at least be a part two coming very soon.